Hello and welcome to CrossTalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. Invisible Children, or Very Visible Truths in Propaganda. The documentary film that went viral on YouTube about Uganda's child soldiers and warlord Joseph Kony has engendered very strong reactions. Is the film about the suffering of children or a well-orchestrated plan preparing public opinion for still another Western military adventure in a foreign country? To CrossTalk the Kony 2012 campaign, I'm joined by Ayo Johnson in London. He is director at Viewpoint Africa and an award-winning journalist on African affairs. In Paris, we go to Julie Owono. She is head of the Africa desk at Internet Without Borders. And in Washington, we go to Jende Frazier. She is a distinguished service professor at Carnegie Mellon University, Heinz College, and Department of Social and Decision Sciences. All right, folks, this is CrossTalk. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Ayo, if I can go to you first in London, what was your reaction to this documentary? Because I watched it very carefully, twice actually, for its production value and for its editorial value. Production value, I'll give it a 10 out of 10. But for what its message was, I was very deeply disturbed by it, because I walked away from it not being an expert on Africa, but I felt it was a exercise in very sophisticated propaganda that has many hidden agendas.
Yep, no doubt about that. It was a slick video. I think the makers got it fundamentally wrong when the video seemed to be stuck in a particular time, which is about 10 years ago, when Joseph Kony was very, very active in Uganda, and clearly his abduction of children, the war itself was physically happening. Very different from the Uganda that we know today, which is very much about peace, a country that's open for business, and some of the scars associated with those crimes that was committed by the Kony back then are not apparent today. So there was clearly a distinction between what the video was about, which is stuck in time, stuck in the past, as opposed to what the true realities were on the ground. So this distinction was not clearly identified. And besides, the video did not go to extreme lengths to actually show what Uganda was like, especially with those victims, how many of them have actually grown up, many of them are teenagers, many of them are young adults. The region as its whole, especially northern Uganda, has changed fundamentally. People don't live in camps anymore, and of course the warlord himself, Joseph Kony himself, his movements and his whereabouts are clearly unknown. So the video didn't get a holistic approach in terms of tackling the Uganda issue, and more so, I think it failed to look at some of the sensitivities associated with the victims, because raising
I want to get back to that issue about agency in a second here. Jende, if I can go to you in Washington, why do you think this film came out now? I mean, it's very odd. I mean, you know, it's already well known that this footage is old, at least a decade. What is and why 2012? And can activism end this great tragedy when we just heard that most of the tragic events portrayed in the documentary are in the past, they're not happening now?
Well, I think it's important to say that Invisible Children has been engaged on this issue for many years. And so this is just ramping up of their campaign to try to increase public awareness and, more importantly, to put pressure on public officials to take action. So I think this is a continuum. It's not a event that does not link to their past actions. And so I think it's just increasing their campaign. Now, clearly, they want more action from the Obama administration. They got President Obama and them and others, you know, to put 100 military advisors into East Africa and Central Africa to pursue Joseph Kony by supporting the regional militaries, and I think that this is just their attempt. I think it was probably somewhat unfortunate in the information that they gave, which I agree with Ayo is very out of date.
Okay,
but I don't think that there is a hidden agenda.
Well, I think there is a hidden agenda, and we'll talk about those advisors that went to Uganda at the end of last year. But Jende, if I can stay with you just before we go to Paris, I mean, were you disturbed by this good guy, bad guy approach in the documentary? Because the Ugandan government 10 years ago, most would say, were not good guys in these conflicts, okay? And that was
I don't think it was about the Ugandan...
that was whitewashed in this documentary.
Well, I actually don't think it was about the Ugandan government. This is not, the Invisible Children is an activist group that has been very much focused on Joseph Kony. And so I think it's fine for other groups who have issues with the Ugandan government to try to latch onto the success of their video to take attacks at President Museveni and his government, but they have a different agenda. Invisible Children has been focused throughout its history on Joseph Kony and not dealing with the domestic politics of Uganda. And so I think it's unfair to charge them with that. I think it is very fair to say that their information is old.
Okay, but I don't think it's, I think it's not fair just to give one side of the story, because there's a lot of bad characters there.
But it's not one side of the story.
Well, in the film it is a one
issues
side.
Of domestic.
Okay, because the Ugandan government, it is well documented that the Ugandan government committed atrocities as well 10 years ago. I'd like to go to Paris here. Julie, what do you think?
That's again old news.
Okay, well, I mean, you can still talk about what happened 10 years ago. Don't whitewash history, okay? Julie, if I can go to you, what do you think of the film?
Whitewashing.
What do you think of the film? And because you wrote a very interesting article about it. I mean, what are your reactions to the debate that have come out?
Yes, my reaction, I want to stress on the point that Kony is a criminal. Everybody agrees with that, and he must be arrested and judged for his crimes. But there is a duty of truth for all these people who spread messages on Uganda and Africa in general, because the continent has changed. And if you notice, the person who first jumped on criticism were Africans who were saying, I don't recognize myself in the picture you're depicting, and probably tried to stop what they considered as a lie and probably as an attempt of propaganda by the Kony video. And if you add three elements, the Invisible Children's very questionable transparency and finances, the U.S. military agenda in the region, which had been announced in November, and the current state surrounding natural resources in the region, you can understand why so many people suspected the video of actually misleading and producing another truth on purpose. So I don't really agree with the fact that it was not a single story. A lot of people, a lot of Africans, including myself, felt kind of offended and did not recognize themselves in the image depicted by the short movie. And in my opinion, if we have to talk about the U.S. policy in Africa in general, it has to be to take another step. It has to go towards business. Like Ayo was saying, Uganda is a country which is looking for business opportunities, and that's what we want to foster. That's what new Africans like me want to foster of their continent.
If I can go back to you in London, I mean, one of the criticisms that have come out is the agency issues, that you need white people, the West, to come and sort things out in Africa. How do you respond to that? Because it's very patronizing, this film.
It is, and it comes back to that question whether it's not about time that African stories are told by Africans themselves, and if it's not their responsibility to make sure they have the mediums and the exposure opportunities to actually expose the stories in the fashion they would wish. So to criticize the agency or this particular charity or NGO or foundation for what they've done, I think it's slightly harsh, but nonetheless, a story nonetheless that they've told in their way, a story to expose the people that they thought were doing wrong, a story that's actually going to raise huge amounts of exposure for them as a business and going to raise millions and millions of dollars into their pocket. So I think it's the wrong type of message to be raising money at the expense of those who've actually suffered the most, which are the Ugandan people, who I may say may not even have a penny from this film. So in fact, many have not even seen the film.
Exactly. Jende, I mean, this is very interesting, is that we heard Julie mention business, but I mean, the filmmakers and their backers are making business, for example, off of bracelets. Does that solve problems in Africa, selling bracelets?
Well, no, I think their message was really misguided. The idea that you're going to make Kony famous and to put his image on a T-shirt with 2012 as if he's campaigning for an elected office, I think it was a truly misguided message. And so, no, I don't think that that's going to solve the problem of the LRA. I think it was intended, in fact, to be an emotional pill, to raise awareness, to raise funding, and to put pressure on American officials. And I think that there were many flaws in the design of that campaign, of which I think both Julie and Ayo speak very eloquently about, that is the perspective of a Westerner. Essentially, Invisible Children took a global medium and had a local message that was focused on an American and Western audience and didn't take into consideration how it would impact Uganda and the Ugandan people, and more specifically, the victims of the LRA. And so I think that it was very poorly designed from a message point of view. But I don't think that we have to impute bad intentions on the part of Invisible Children. I think that they just got their messaging completely wrong, and they should have had more guidance, probably from local people.
Okay, Julie in Paris, jump in.
Go ahead
in Paris. Go ahead.
Yes, but the Invisible Children has a responsibility. When you take the responsibility of encouraging people to take action behind their screen and encourage it to take action for a complicated issue, which is get a criminal in a complicated region, you have a duty of telling the truth. You have to be ethical about this, because there is another issue that we haven't dealt yet with, is the legal issue. What does get Kony mean? I mean, I don't understand what get him means. Does it mean to kill him? That's what I asked in my article. Does it mean to kill him or to arrest him and judge him? We have to be clear on that. And you cannot just tell get Kony, especially like I was saying to Africans who have changed, who are really really keen on being careful of what type of message is spread about their country and their continent. That's what I wanted to.
All right, I'm going to jump in here.
I wanted to ask also to Mrs. Fraser.
Okay, we're going to go to a short break here, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the controversial documentary film. Stay with RT. I'd like to go back to you in London. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't like conspiracies, but you know, at the end of last year, we hear American advisors being sent into Uganda to go chase down this warlord, and then this film comes out, and in the film, the message is there. It's, you know, if the West intervenes, you know, we have to make this great effort to get rid of this man, and there's implied it must be the West, it must be the Americans, it must maybe Europeans and American allies, and I'm very sensitive to this because, you know, all of these interventions lately, and I can't see one that has worked out very well. And I can't see how a country in Uganda and its neighbors could fare very well with a military intervention there, because actually it would make things worse, not better.
Well, a lot of people have made a lot of accusations against the charity in question, the NGO in question, simply because of the way they've been able to raise money internally in the United States. But if the Ugandan army was unable to capture Kony, if they were able to resolve the bitter war which they had 10 years ago, and clearly other neighboring countries are clearly affected, and if the United States wants to offer some level of support through
do you really think, let me ask you a question, do you really think that they don't know where he is? Do you believe that?
Well, of course, it's impossible. I think with the technologies available now, they can pinpoint everyone anywhere in the world. I think they probably have a clue, but again, it's in dense jungle. But again, the conspiracy about whether the United States wants to use this opportunity to expand AFRICOM across the African continent, colonizing Africa again, these are some of the sentiments. I don't necessarily share them. I personally think that they probably are well intended, because they don't physically have that much of a presence in Uganda, and in this particular instance, I think it's just a few hundred American soldiers who are offering assistance, technological support, and military capabilities to the Ugandan army and their neighbors to be able to curtail the problems that's facing them.
Okay, Jende, if I can go to you. The American involvement in Southeast Asia started in the late 40s with some good intentions and a few hundred advisors. I'd like to point that out here. I mean, what kind of footprint is the United States creating here in Uganda, you think?
Well, probably less of a footprint than the United States has in many other regions of the world, and most regions, including in Europe. And so 100 soldiers as advisors spread across 4 countries is not a military footprint at all. In fact, it's doing too little. From my perspective, and it's primarily a matter of our intelligence. We do have intelligence. We have been tracking, we've been developing that capability for many, many years. We have Acholi speakers who help. Kony's operational security is extremely good. He rarely uses the radio. It is not at all easy to track him. And we're not that prepared to share that information with a lot of other countries, a lot of groups, because you're concerned about losing that capacity. And so they're there to give technical assistance, to receive any intelligence that we get. We get a lot of that from former abductees who have escaped, and therefore give more information about how Kony operates in the bush and his forces and how many they are. And so it is not at all easy, and there's not really a big military footprint. Again, I say it's doing too little. It's not doing too much.
Okay, Julie, what do you think about that? You know, once you open the gate, sometimes it's hard to get a guest to leave. What do you think about it?
Well, I don't share the idea according to which the U.S. might use the Kony case to broaden its Africa mission on the continent. But I really feel that this Kony action is a counterproductive example of what should be done, what the U.S. policy should be like in Africa nowadays. In my opinion, the urgency for the U.S. is to foster business relationship, a win-win partnership, economic partnership with these economically growing countries. Africa is a market of 1 billion potential consumers, which could be an opportunity for American companies, but also for Africans themselves, because I believe that by doing business, we can also tackle a lot of issues. So when you see that nowadays only 2% of American foreign trade outflows are going to Africa, only 2% of 300 billion, which is nothing. I mean, and most of them go to oil and extractive mineral sector, but for me, it's not really relevant compared to the reality of the continent I'm witnessing, which has a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of
really interesting,
and that's what I would like to see fostered.
It seems to me, again, going back to perception, I really like what Julie had to say here, because, again, this documentary film makes Africa look like a completely hopeless, broken down place that just needs to be rescued. And Julie's saying really just the opposite, is that, you know, look at what we can really do and give us a fair chance in doing it. This documentary is counterproductive in that perspective.
Yes. On one hand, it shows a helpless Africa, and Africa that's not capable of addressing its own problems on its own, yes. But on the other hand, it also shows an Africa who's clearly understands how geopolitics works, understands exactly the influence that the Chinese have on the African continent, and the fear that the United States and European allies alike want to counterbalance that Chinese influence. So if the Americans are getting involved in this campaign, it could be on two folds. Firstly, it could be to kinder influence that was once lost, one, and also to, don't forget that Uganda, like so many other countries across the African continents, are now awash with oil.
Yes.
So that in itself could be an incentive.
Jende, what do you think about that? I mean, it's interesting is that, you know, there's the kind of a new neo-colonial wave, you know, the United States, Western Europe, China. Is it turning into a playground for outsiders again? And this film, again, is so amazingly sentimental about what the West should do, okay? And, you know, and the West doesn't have a good record in Africa. Let's all remember that.
Well, I think the problem, the West has a mixed record in Africa, as Africa has a mixed record, as history has a mixed record. I think that it's too simplistic to suggest that either we're going to be militarized, or either we should do business, or we should just do humanitarian issues, or maybe we should just promote democracy. In fact, U.S. policy does all of those things. It's a serious policy, and it's a robust and holistic policy. And we should be doing more, I think. It is not the Uganda situation, I just have to say, and the support for the regional countries to try to pursue and arrest Kony or kill Kony, as it may be, is not about oil. That effort has been going on since 2002, when the U.S. started sharing intelligence that helped lead to Kony being dislodged, in fact, from northern Uganda, which is not picked up, unfortunately, in this film, because it is simplistic. But I don't think our analysis of U.S. policy should be equally simplistic. It is far more complex, We are trying to do many things at once. And we are trying to develop a holistic approach. For instance, dealing with northern Uganda and the Kony issue, we supported the Ugandan military with intelligence and capacity, night vision goggles, etc. We also supported the people of northern Uganda, especially the Acholi, in terms of the peace process, in terms of rehabilitating and reconciling the communities and trying to support former abductees. We supported the peace talks.
Well,
more than $2 million went into those peace talks.
Would have preferred a documentary on everything you just said since 2002? Do you think that would make people more aware what's going on in Africa? Or just wouldn't be sexy enough? Just wouldn't be sexy enough?
No, I would have. It wouldn't be simplistic enough. Often I have to say, and I'm not trying to paint a broad brush, but often activists and advocates who are trying to push a single issue will do so on the basis of emotional appeal and on the basis of a simplistic message.
Excellent. I agree.
To reach the majority of people. And I think that is part of their trade. It's unfortunate. So I'm not saying that the film should have been accurate in terms of the portrayal of Uganda today. If it wanted to talk about it historically, it should have been clear that it was a historical portrayal. But instead, it presented old facts as if they're current. And that and the messaging make Kony famous were the two fundamental flaws, I think, of Kony 2012 video. But I also think from the point of view of looking at U.S. policy that we should not be equally simplistic. Oh, they're just trying to chase oil. Oh, they're just militarizing policy.
The U.S. has a pretty bad road record when it comes to interventions. Well, go ahead, Julie, jump in Paris. Go ahead.
We're not being simplistic. We're saying that efforts are not made where they should be. I mean, in my opinion, like I said, it is high time for that U.S. sees Africa other than a simple stock of natural resources. It's also a potential, economic potential that should be embraced also. So that's what I'm saying. We're not being simplistic saying that. It's the reality. I gave a figure. I just said only 2% of foreign trade is going to Africa. It's not sufficient.
But I agree, Julie. Julie, I agree with your point, but I don't think the United States has simply seen Africa as a source of natural resources. The United States, under the Clinton administration, passed the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which was an act which was to encourage trade with Africa and to create duty-free entrance of African products into the American market. But we got to get those products from Africa. United States has tried to put in place policies for transparency, anti-corruption. I think the U.S. government doesn't do enough to support American companies in Africa, but we're a country that doesn't direct
I want to go to Ayo in London.
We're
We're almost out of time here. What is the legacy of this film, in your opinion, Ayo? I mean, do people know more or less or the wrong things about Africa?
Well, I think people know slightly more about Africa. It exposes Africa for its frailties and its issues, which are so synonymous with the continent, sadly. But I think it puts Africa back on the spotlight. I mean, the numbers of people that have watched this video only celebrates that fact. But again, it also shows that Africa has to look at itself and why it can't expose its own stories in the fashion that it wishes. And of course, you can see quite clearly that Uganda thinks that there's been an element of damage to its reputation moving forward, which is why they've got to create a campaign now to show exactly what the current situation in Uganda is like now, to sort of counter this massive exposure, which sadly shows a
we've
side
run out of
Uganda
time here. I hope
that
somebody will make a documentary about the reactions to this documentary. Many thanks to my guests today in London, Paris, and in Washington. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, Crosstalk rules.